And just like that, back for another episode of the Same Shade of Difference podcast. Probably not the McC Wanders podcast because graphic designers have let me down again. But I do have a super exciting surprise. For 2 episodes in a row, my former co-host is back as my co-host for the Same Shade of Difference.
I was actually going to ask when you did the intro there if like where the rebrand was, and I had a feeling it was in graphic design hell. So bummer to hear that that's still going nowhere fast.
It was due in March, and then I got an email on April 12th that said, I'm going to start on it tomorrow. I'll send you stuff. And yesterday I had a full day of contractors in my house, and so I'm like, well, I should follow up on this just for the entertainment value. And so I replied to that email and said on May 12th, just for those of you keeping score at home, and said, hey, any update on my logo? And I just checked the email. I don't have any update on my logo. So
well, if nothing else, hopefully my audio is better in this one than the last one, and I guess the last Craft Brew Geek podcast. We think we've narrowed it down to a hardware issue, but I feel like making my return to podcasting, we're really doing the fans a disservice by not letting them hear the pipes in all their svelte glory, I guess.
And I didn't realize how committed you were to part-time podcasting until you texted me and said, oh man, my audio sounded like garbage. My plosives were all over the place. And I'm like, the dude doesn't listen to podcasts, but he listened to our podcast.
I listened to it because I was curious how the audio turned out, and I was glad I did because I heard how terrible it was at the time. So hopefully those problems will be sorted out now.
So we have a guest today, Alex Cortellesi, who is a friend of ours, but a nomad in my mind, a world traveler, a guy that likes to learn stuff, explore the world. So welcome, Alex.
Thank you. I was getting excited. You were working up your co-host over there, and I was like, wow, that is a really, really nice introduction. It wasn't for me.
But you're going to do
your chopped liver over there, Alex.
I am.
John and I did like 30-something of these, and then he went on assignments. So he's only back part-time, but I'll take part-time.
Okay.
I'll take that voice part-time.
Suppose
anytime.
He's earned that hand job that you gave him earlier.
Absolutely. And there we go. We have the explicit tag, just like that.
We really fucked it up now, boys.
Oh, was that too soon?
We're 3 minutes in. I like to have 15 or 20 minutes in before somebody drops an F-bomb, but
Fuck that.
Yeah.
It's all good. It's all good. This episode is not going to get me a podcasting job now on Spotify.
Demonetized.
Okay. Oh, man. Well, I've got a flight of Imperial Stouts in front of me, so, yep. Show's on.
So, Mark, with our good friend Alex having a flight of Imperial Stouts in front of him, where are we recording at today?
So we are at the Braxton Barrel House, which is John's home away from home.
It is. If I came here anymore, they would charge me rent.
And I, at times, am fairly frequent, and it's a super cool place. And how are those stouts, Alex?
They're hitting me just right. They're pretty tasty.
So John and I went to the main Braxton house for the Dark Charge weekend. So if we record a Craft Brew Geek episode, we'll talk a little bit more about that and lots of interesting stuff. But today we're here to talk about travel. So talk us through. We worked together, but prior to us working, and in fact, your interview, you were in New Zealand on a sabbatical from being employed. You didn't have a job. You weren't on sabbatical from a company. You didn't have a job, right?
Correct.
And so you saved up your money and you decided to travel the world. So kind of walk us through, and John and I will ask questions along the way, or just say we're jealous, or whatever comes up.
Absolutely. So it definitely, I found it to be a somewhat unique topic here in America, but overseas it is slightly less interesting. In my travels, I did find that I frequently just came across people. I would say Germany and France and England were the best represented countries as far as just finding people that are from those nations in far-flung places. And it's somewhat normal and encouraged for people to take extended stints off. Oftentimes it's in your younger years, after or before college, to just take a year or 6 months and go get a job in Peru, or just go do something unique. And even, I believe it was Belgium, that, speaking to a couple of folks that I think were in their 40s, their federal laws actually have a provision for them to leave their job, and their employer is required to hire a temp until their return for up to 1 to 2 years, and they can just go and travel and return to their previous employment with no consequence whatsoever.
And even some of those countries you mentioned, I know France for sure, they really invest in their employees, in that they have long periods of time off available just as part of your employment. So you
4 weeks is standard everywhere else in the developed world.
Yeah, and United States, you're lucky to get 10 days.
Yeah, I don't even think we have a federal mandate for paid time off, which
we do not. Yeah,
what all these other countries have, and it's generally 4, and I think some even go up to 5 or 6 weeks.
Yeah,
and that's not including your holidays.
Yeah. Right, and that's not the sabbatical you were talking about. That's just your regular time off, but it would allow anybody to travel.
And I could imagine having a different perspective of not even having been motivated to break out of the rat race had I had more provisions for time off and just more freedom to enjoy life.
Right.
Because I know somebody I follow online, it's either Sweden or Germany. I don't remember which of the two they live in. But along with, an relatively to here insane amount of vacation time, there's also a law that they have to take a certain chunk of it, consecutively. It's at some point in the year, you're required to take 2 weeks off, as opposed to just breaking it up piecemeal. You need to do a big kind of leave to recharge, which I think is
I've read that.
Awesome, and I'm very jealous.
I'm not sure where that is, but I've read that as well, and that kind of forces that mental health break.
Right. Yeah, even if you think I don't need it or whatnot, or I'm too busy, it makes a big difference to
a lot of times you don't know you need it until you realize it once you're getting what you need.
I feel like I'd still be working if somebody had helped me, and I'm a old mature adult. I could help myself, but I think you feel pressure not to take off in many roles in many companies, and I felt that pressure, and I think people would be healthier mentally in the United States if we had a better outlook on time off.
Some corporate cultures definitely push that badge of honor for putting in those 70-hour weeks and not taking any time off, and I never bought into that.
Yeah.
Not in the least.
Especially because, at least in kind of my experience as well, even if you're doing that, it's been 3 years since I took any real time off that wasn't a holiday or whatnot, and okay, you're putting in the 70-hour weeks, but are you as productive as you would be if you took a month off and then came back and you were, actually recharged and much more engaged, as opposed to, you're kind of on the grind just because you feel like you got to be on the grind.
Yeah, and as a card-carrying workaholic myself, I feel like I probably missed the boat there, and I think recharging would have helped my productivity throughout my career.
Yeah, and that's kind of why I bring it up, because I'm similar to you. I'm very guilty of probably not taking off nearly as much time as I should, but I periodically kind of have that realization, like I haven't taken any vacation in 6 months. It's been holidays here and there, and that's really it. That even though I might not feel like I'm really like burning out, I need to take some time. If I force myself to do it, kind of like Alex was saying, then I come back and I'm like, oh man, I'm so much better off than I was, and I didn't realize where I was, especially because a lot of my hobbies are not that dissimilar to what I do professionally. But taking time off, and literally like I took just like a week and a half last year, and I didn't let myself use my personal laptop for the entire duration of that time, even though that would be like normally what I spend a lot of my time doing, but it really helped me, I think, when I came back. It was good.
So walk us through, you were at a big corporate IT job, and how long did it take you to kind of get geared up and develop your plan, and was there anything in particular that drove you to this? Were you stressed out at work, or were you just wanting to travel the world, or a combination of multiple factors?
It was definitely a combination of multiple factors. In my mid-30s, kind of reflecting on my life, there wasn't, if you were to write an autobiography, or if I was to, it wouldn't have been all that interesting. So that was definitely a part of it. Some of it was career burnout, kind of feeling the rat race, and really just lamenting that. Like, I feel like I was putting in a solid effort at that rat race, but I was still running the rat race. And I was just finding a lack of fulfillment in general in life there. So it all kind of started, I think I saw some hashtag van life things going on the internet, and I was like, well, that's an interesting way. Like, I've always had an adventurous spirit, and like just going down a random road and seeing what's at the end of it.
How long roughly were you at that role in the midst of the rat race, as it were?
Yeah, I had done about 12 years in corporate IT to that point. My first real job at the age of 23, and to the point where I quit my position was when I turned 35.
Wow.
And between those, the only 2 jobs I worked in that span, I don't think I ever took more than like 10 days off consecutively. So I don't know. I felt like there was a little bit something more that my life story needed to have in it, and just kind of formulated the plan. I've always been kind of a saver, so even early on, I was just generally spending less than I earned. So slowly saving up money and realizing, if I really wanted to, I wouldn't have to work for a little bit and I'd be okay. And it would probably be worth it.
Good deal. So how did you pick what you wanted to do, or did you have a plan, or did you just kind of say, these generally are the places I'd like to go, and just kind of rattle around across the world? Yeah,
so I started kind of fantasizing about the van life and just the sense of freedom that would give me. But I
think the van life shit is cool, but more for somebody of your age than my age, just from sleeping in a non-optimal sort of.
Have you seen some of these vans?
I have. So I follow all the. I'm a wannabe van lifer that's like, I'm probably not going to get there because of my age, but some of the stuff's cool, and
you're building obstacles for yourself, Mark.
As I say, not with that attitude.
Sure, not with that attitude. So, well, I did buy this vehicle to sleep in that you have seen. So I hope to do some fly fishing trips and sleep in it.
I mean, a good foam mattress is all it takes to make it feel comfortable. So just the right gear makes a whole world of difference.
So you have you had a 4Runner then when you were thinking about
I
that
did,
sort of nomadic
and I
activity?
thought I would get a larger van, and I was never really made it down the path where I was committed to buying this specific model of van and doing this to it. I think that was just the idea starting to take hold. And I kind of transitioned because in a van I would be seeing generally the Americas. Like, obviously you can put it on a freighter and have it shipped overseas if I were to have kitted out a van. But
Sure.
the logical thing to do would have been to explore, North America and Central America and potentially South America. But I kind of looked at it ironically and said, this could be something I could come back to later in life. I'm young now, so how about throwing everything I need on my back and getting on a plane?
So where did you go first?
So the first stop was Africa, and the trip really was set with just some continents, essentially.
Okay.
3 months in Africa, 3 months in Europe, 3 months in Asia, and then 3 months sort of between the Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand. So the trip was intended to be about a year, but then COVID hit and kind of extended things, and it honestly worked out beautifully.
So how did you do research before you headed to the continents, and what did that research look like to you? I know you're a tech guy, but you're also not a social media person, to my knowledge. So to me, van life to me probably looks different than van life to you in terms of how we see what people are doing.
Yeah, there's definitely that lens of social media that just makes it look glorious and beautiful. And to an extent, like, that is part of the reality, but it is only part of that reality. So let's see. So the trip started in Africa and kind of had an anchor point to really make it go. I traveled with my ex-girlfriend, and not an ex-girlfriend at that time, but she was engaged in a animal conservation project in Rwanda, and we spent a month in Rwanda, and
Okay.
she was able to work with the team there that's working to protect an endangered bird species, and really commit herself to the objectives that she had there as a veterinary technician, bringing her skills and training, which the same quality of skills and training aren't available in Rwanda. Like, a veterinarian trained in Rwanda is probably not going to thrive in a first world country just on the merits of their professional skills. So she was able to bring a lot, in addition to just supplies, like packing a suitcase full of even things that are just basic here in America are like gold in some of these countries. So started in Rwanda and spent a month there, and it was good because it gave me time to acclimate to my new reality, which was when you go on a vacation, it has an end, and you can see it, and you're aware of it. And having quit my job, I've quit. Like, I've turned in notice. They have no commitment to rehire me whatsoever. I remember a day specifically where we were out at a national park, and we were like setting up a sort of snare trap to capture these birds so we could put transmitters on them. And we set the trap, and we're just going to wait out the day for the birds to just meander through this area that we've set these little wire traps that'll snag their feet. So then we then run out and like catch the birds and restrain them, and then put like a hood over their eyes so they stop freaking out. And then we put transmitters on
waiting
them.
out the day is completely different than doing deadline-driven IT work.
That was my moment where we had set the trap. We're all just sitting under a covered, just like a covered almost pavilion kind of area in this little camp that's there for the rangers of this park. And I'm just so used to having something to do. And here I am just sitting there with absolutely nothing to do. And I'm just like, I guess I'll take a nap. And that was when the reality of it hit me that my state of living was just going to be different for a while.
Was this your first time traveling internationally as well? Had you been out of the country much before that? Or
I had actually been to Africa 3 or 4 years prior, basically due to my girlfriend at the time being involved in the same project.
Right.
And I just decided to go with her. And while we're over there, we'll work on her project for a week, and then we'll go and we'll do a safari in Tanzania. Mm-hmm. And then we went to Zanzibar, which is a beautiful tropical little island, and kind of got off the grid for a few days.
Cool. So, I know we've talked and you have ridden motorcycles, but I sort of got some of my wanderlust from long way round, long way down, and long way down was super cool because it was mostly Africa. Some of it was on the way to Africa through Morocco and some other places, and Germany. They went to Moto Guzzi, I think, which is that in Germany or in Belgium or someplace. Anyway, I found most fascinating, long way round was cool and some of the Soviet stuff, but long way down, the African people across all of the countries within Africa, the communities, even some that were maybe still a little war-torn or kind of had mercenary sort of military troops as part of the local authority. The people were very welcoming. So was that your experience, your travels in Africa, about how much they embraced you as a traveler?
I'll even expand that to speak about my experiences with people in general. I found that the people living in the countries that generally had the worst reputation, and those reputations were usually established by those countries' leaders or dictators,
right,
often had the friendliest people when it actually came into walking into a village. And I think to an extent those people are aware of what the world thinks of them. And I don't know, I'm a pretty positive person, and I tend to believe that good prevails over evil just in about every sense of life. And people are good. They're welcoming, and I think even more so in the parts of the world that we look at as being impoverished. And I like to qualify poverty now as material poverty, because I think there are other types of poverty, frankly, which we have in America, which aren't maybe material, but
and maybe more damning to our society than the material poverty in some other parts of the world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The sense of community that you get in places that suffer from material poverty is a lot stronger than what you feel in the average, American suburb. So,
yeah.
People that don't even know the names of their neighbors here in suburbia, and, in rural communities in Africa, people absolutely rely on each other. There's no blood. It's just unspoken that you look after the people in your community. And I don't know, when you really see it firsthand, it's kind of eye-opening.
We could learn a lot if we were interested in learning. That's what you're saying. So after you left there, where was the next stop, and was there any particular reason?
3 months in Africa, and after that first month in Rwanda, I then rented a small 4x4 pickup truck, and we drove around in South Africa, Namibia, and Botswana for 2 months. After that, we went to England, which is where my partner's family was. She has part of her dad is an English immigrant and has all of his family in England. So we stopped and spent a week visiting them, and it was a very nice recharge, definitely.
So up to visiting her family in England, you all were camping most of the time? Were you staying in hostels? What were you doing?
I would say after leaving Rwanda, it was probably 75% tent camping, which sounds kind of alarming when you're traveling through Africa, but it really isn't. Like, the campgrounds felt safe. I didn't feel like I was going to get dragged out of my tent by a lion or trampled by buffalo at night. There's plenty of other humans around, and you do feel a sense of distance from those threats in the campgrounds, the established places.
I always heard the rhinos were the worst.
Yeah, it's not really the carnivores that you're worried about. It's the herbivores. Rhinos are pretty bad, but they're not common. I would be more worried about buffalo.
Okay.
Yeah.
So England, you spent time obviously not camping. You were staying with family, right?
Yep.
What part of England was that?
That was the sort of around Newcastle.
Okay.
This would be the closest major settlement.
Do any sightseeing there, or mostly hang with
A
family?
little bit. The family there, absolutely like prototypical English folk, and it was just absolutely charming and lovable, and they were so hospitable, and it really was a wonderful recharge after 3 months of living life in a completely different way, to just kind of return to something that felt really normal, even just for a week. But I didn't feel like I had been missing that, like just going out to random restaurants and sitting on the couch with family. I appreciated it, but I wasn't missing it at that point yet.
Okay. So what happened after England? Where was the next journey?
The next spot was in Norway.
Okay.
Norway found to be the most expensive of the countries that we visited. We rented a small Toyota compact car that was probably 10 years old, and I believe it was like $50 a day. And this is 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah.
From a company called Rent a Wreck.
Yeah.
And that was, it is what it is, because Norway is just a fantastically beautiful place. When you really get out and exploring the fjords, it's just some of the most dramatic landscapes that I've seen anywhere else in the world.
A guy who was my boss for several years at my job, I guess like 3 jobs ago now. His daughter married someone from Norway and ended up moving back there. And so every year he would go back and visit, usually for about a month, like around the holidays. And one of the coolest things was they lived, his daughter and son-in-law lived like right on the fjords. And it was such a beautiful view. And he would find like websites that would have webcams of the fjord, and he would come back and share the links to those feeds with everyone on the team. And so there was a long stretch of time where I would be, spending my day working in central Kentucky, and there would be like a little windowed thing in the corner of my screen that's just like a live stream of the fjord, and it's such a like beautiful, peaceful thing. So I can only imagine seeing that in person, how great that would be.
Yeah,
Driving around
paradise. Yeah,
you're right.
Driving around Norway was some of the most epic driving that I did on this trip. It's one of those things, if you've ever seen the Grand Canyon, where you really can't describe or appreciate the scale of it unless you see it with your own eyes. And so much of the landscape in Norway suits that.
I find that with both the Grand Canyon and the Hoover Dam. I've probably been to the Hoover Dam, 25 times, and every time I look at it, I'm like, how the hell did they do this when they did it? Because I don't know how they do it today. It's just an amazing piece of engineering out in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. So after Norway, you went where?
After Norway, the next stop was Spain and Portugal. Again, getting around, combination by rental car and with a few bus trips in between cities. Kind of did Portugal in a different way than most people that are going on a European vacation would do, which was renting a really cheap car and driving it down dirt roads by the beach and finding places to camp. I loved it. I had a great time in Portugal. Found it to be very welcoming. Hit it in September, which was just after the tourist season. All of the people with their children out of school, they're not out there anymore. And really, like the 1st of September, the prices of everything were down. Just fewer people at the beaches, and it was still warm and beautiful. And September is a great time to visit Portugal.
I follow a bunch of people on social media, different things, van life and other things like that, nomadic travels. And what I find a little interesting is that Costa Rica seems to be like a destination where U.S. citizens move to, but Portugal is kind of like the European version of Central America's, place that everybody wants to go, and it's beautiful and it's cost effective and it's better than living wherever they were living.
I would have said that Norway was the most expensive place that I visited, and Portugal was honestly the least.
Oh, wow.
Traveled in different ways in different countries, but I remember buying bottles of wine for essentially $2 that were really good. So was buying them on a regular basis. And things like food were reasonable. It was honestly a really affordable place to visit. I loved Portugal.
When you said bottles of wine for $2, my joke I was going to make initially was, okay, so I need to start learning Portuguese. But I am curious, as you traveled all these places, unless you're like a secret polyglot that we don't know about, what was communication like as you moved around? And
very easy. English is such a universal language, and that was what I learned. Really, the only place where I felt a little out of my element was Spain, because there's enough people out there in the world speaking Spanish that there was very little obligation on their behalf to speak English to you.
Sure.
But everywhere else, English is, if it's not the first language, it's the second, and it's being taught in schools.
Right. That makes a lot of sense, because with Spain in particular, because early pandemic, when I was not on the other side of the world and I was in my apartment here in northern Kentucky, I went through some Duolingo stuff just to fill time, and I'm like, what language is going to be like most bang for my buck? And I'm like, easily Spanish, because other than English, it's got to be like just the spread of it is insane. So it makes a lot of sense that there. And did you have any, like, I don't know, the language I took in high school was Spanish because it was easiest. So, I mean, was there any like familiarity there, or was it just like, what, I'll communicate with like emojis on my phone or whatever, and they'll tell me where the toilet is.
I did use Google Translate on a number of occasions. Did have the same few years of high school Spanish to try to stumble by on.
Probably like unused just long enough for you to almost forget all of it. Yeah, that's my experience. Yeah,
it came back relatively quickly when you're immersed in it.
Sure,
it really helps to bring it back to you, versus just being in a classroom and then walking out of that classroom and everybody else is speaking English. When you're just hearing it around you, it's almost subconscious that really helps your mind.
The osmosis is going on at that point almost.
Your mind recognizes, like, we better understand what these people are saying.
So when you left Spain and Portugal, what was the next destination?
Greece.
Okay.
I really liked Greece, and the first stop was in Athens before going out to some of the Greek islands. If you're not really familiar with Greece, obviously there is a mainland country, but Greece is very well known for its islands that exist throughout the Mediterranean. I really liked Athens. Like the place that we stayed, it was in a hostel, and it was above a town market, and there were some homeless people that kind of had set up around this market. And there was a social service, I believe it was just funded by the government, that came around with like vans that had washing machines in them, and then at one point, like, there was food being provided, like they were looking after people, and it was in an area that didn't feel posh. It felt sort of working class, and I really like that. Like, I don't really want to be on a tourist track. I want to see the authentic side of the city. And I feel like that authentic side that I saw of Athens, I just really liked. It just felt like people were looking after each other.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
That's not been I know about Greece. I've watched some videos, read a little bit, but that's not ever been a destination, at least in my mind. So hearing that you really liked it, that's makes it more interesting for me.
Can't go wrong with the food there.
Yeah, sure.
I did enjoy the food in Greece quite a bit. The islands are absolutely beautiful, and there's islands for every time of year. Some of them have better climates for going in the heat of summer. Some of them are better for a little bit more towards the fall or the shoulder seasons, as most people look at them. And I think I was in Greece in October, and that's like way after the tourist season there. So things were fairly affordable, and the water was still just nice enough to swim in. The days were in the upper 70s. It was a great time to visit.
Cool. So where did you, when you left Greece, what was next on your agenda?
Greece was really the last stop in Europe, but remember being in a cafe somewhere in Greece and talking with another couple, and they were speaking really highly of Turkey, and it was looking like Turkey was going to be a layover on the way to India. So, when you don't really have a timeline of 2 weeks before I have to get back to work, it's like, well, if I'm going to have a layover somewhere, I might as well just explore what that is. So let's spend 4 days in Istanbul. Or it ended up working out that we took a ferry from the Greek islands, not a very long ferry, like 30 minutes to get to Turkey, and essentially crossed the border on a ferry, and then rented a car in Turkey and drove around for 2 weeks.
No issues. You've rented a car a bunch at this point in your journeys. No issues renting a car, being somebody from another country?
No. Nobody even asked me for this international driver's license that I went to AAA and filled out. Once they see that you're an American, they're generally just okay with giving you the keys to that vehicle.
Did you buy any trip insurance from the standpoint of health insurance? Did you do anything above what you would have?
I did purchase insurance through a company called Safety Wing. They are not sponsoring this podcast. If they are, I'd like to have my cut. But healthcare in the rest of the world is actually like reasonable compared to what we're used to in America. So the idea of a company insuring you in every other country other than America isn't that wild. I'd have to look at my spreadsheet that I kept for all my expenses to tell you exactly how much it was for 2 people for 18 months, but it was very reasonable, and the only clause in it was that it only covers you for up to 3 weeks in America.
Which is perfect.
Right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Very clearly our health care system is out of whack.
That's that's a big condemnation of I think
that was one of my big understandings that I gained being overseas, is that the way we do healthcare in America is not ideal, in my opinion. Everybody's going to have their own opinion about that based on their personal experiences, but mine showed me that we tend to scowl at socialized medicine for their waiting lists and just the fact that everybody's paying more taxes. Really, everybody's not paying more taxes, not in any significant sense. And a lot of times people in these countries that have socialized healthcare, you can buy private healthcare that gives you all of the same privilege that you have in America as far as privately funded hospitals and elective procedures and whatnot.
Yeah.
The only difference is that if you get laid off, you're not severed from your health care.
Yeah, yeah. I'm always and not to drive us down a different road that we've been on a few of these podcasts, but socialism appears to be a bad word, and in fact, it might actually be a really good word. And I would argue, here I'm going to go drive us down this road anyway. I would argue that we have financial socialism for rich people in big business
Absolutely.
here in the United States, and that seems to be hypocritical. But anyway, let's talk about India next.
Yeah.
There goes those two people that were thinking about a sponsorship for us.
Well, I mean, we hit the explicit tag early on, so it's okay if we're fucked in this way too.
Yeah, all right, there you go.
India. My first impression of India was walking out into the quote unquote open air from arriving at the airport, and just taken aback by just how much smog existed in India. Like, I was afraid to breathe the air in India, and I was really glad that we had already arranged for a car to take us to a yoga retreat, like out in the mountains. So arrived in India, got straight in this car. It was midnight, and just got out of town. I think the thing that I really appreciated most about India is that I felt the furthest away from home there. Really tickled that sense of adventure, to where everything was just so foreign. Like, you can't read the road signs. It's not just like in Spain where it's just the words don't make sense. It's
right. The characters mean nothing.
The
to
characters
you as you
mean
look at,
absolutely
like, the
nothing.
glyphs that are the alphabet. Yeah.
It just feels so foreign. Like, the music that the cab driver is playing, like, India is a country of 1 billion people. Like, it absolutely has every bit of its own culture that doesn't carry any American influence. I mean, it does to an extent, but it's on the surface. You don't always see those. And I like that. Like, I liked feeling like I was really on an epic adventure somewhere on the other side of the world.
All the things I've seen about India, though, it also seems like you mentioned the smog. It seems like that they have a great number of vehicles, although what their vehicles look like may be different than what our traditional roadways and highways look like. But it's just amazing the number of small engines and things like that.
Yes. And that's responsible for, I think, the majority of the pollution is that you just have all these small engines with no emissions-related equipment, and they're poorly maintained and running. India, I was so glad I did not attempt to drive there. It would have been terrifying. I remember as we got into the car leaving the airport, driving down the road, it's like 8 lanes going in one direction out of the airport, and it's midnight. But nobody is using any of the lane markers. Like, it is literally just a free-for-all in this giant open highway that has lane markers, but we just don't use them. Like, our driver he's got like 6 other lanes to choose from, but he still just like comes flying up behind somebody like in a 3-wheeled motorcycle and just lays on the horn before swerving and going around him. And there were like 5 open lanes for him to have done that. It's just
I get
it's
anxiety.
something of a lifestyle, I guess, over there.
I get anxiety from watching the Dashcam subreddit and seeing the traffic from India. So somebody will have recorded, and I'll be like, "Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh my god!" I cannot believe they didn't crash.
No, I remember we're still in Delhi, which is a city of like 15 million, and we're on a somewhat regular road, maybe 3 or 4 lanes, and on the left side there's just like some barricades set up like you would see at a construction site if they were just putting up cement barricades, if they were repaving another lane on the highway. And then the driver just slows down and kind of like squeezes in the middle of these barricades, and then all of a sudden we're on like an elevated highway where it's just like 8 lanes of highway on a bridge that's like 50 feet off the ground, just driving over the city. And it was just like the strangest thing. Like, was this just not open, or it's just understood that you go between the barricades to get on this giant highway? It was kind of surreal.
Yeah. So I one of the motorcycle adventure people I watch, she went through that recently, and like everybody told her a different way to go through these set of barriers to get through customs, to get across the border, and none of the answers were right. It was just amazing.
Or is it that they were all right?
Or and you might be right that they were all right. So we're in India now, and so it seems to be a good time, at least from my standpoint, to take a short break before we come back and talk about where you went to as you left India. How's that sound?
Certainly. And
we're back. So, anything that stood out to you, Alex, in India that besides the smog and kind of the traffic patterns and stuff like that, what were the big cultural things that really knocked you out or you thought were super cool?
The presence of monkeys in the human cities and society. Not specifically that they were like worshipped or somehow appreciated or anything. They were just part of the cities. And I remember like there was a large suspension bridge across a river, a suspension bridge that's like 6 feet wide. It's for people to walk across, not for vehicles. And the monkeys were just sort of using the bridge just like the people. Some of them were sort of monkeying from the cables. Some of them were just like walking along the surface of the bridge around people. There was at one point like I don't want to call it a domestic dispute, but it was more of like gang warfare when it came to the monkeys, and they were there was just a lot of yelling and violence. And
so some monkey on monkey violence,
and like nobody was like walking around like looking at it like it was unusual. It was just sort of accepted that this is just part of what goes on in this little settlement. And just walking down the street. So I stayed at a yoga retreat in India, and the place for the retreat was maybe an hour's walk outside of the town. And just in the process of walking into town, you just walk through, walking down a dirt road, you're walking by various groups of monkeys. And it was just kind of strange because, we share like 98% of their DNA. And just to see some of the human-like behaviors of them, and just how adapted they are to the fact that they coexist with us so closely in these areas, that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I've seen stuff like that on videos, but not. I'd be at least uncomfortable initially in that environment if there was sort of that violence thing going on.
It was amusing. Honestly, I saw some pretty interesting things. I remember seeing a monkey eating a popsicle. They're characters, man. It was fun. They regularly made call it a raid on the yoga retreat, the building that we were staying in, where they'd come by every like 3 days or so, and they kept dogs on the premise just to. The dogs weren't very efficient at chasing off the monkeys because the monkeys are just way more intelligent than the dogs. But they just come through and just have a rummage of the kitchen if nobody was in there. And
really?
You'd hear them on the roof, like, corrugated metal roofs. So
right.
you'd hear something, kong, 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 walking along the roof. And it's like, oh, yep, the monkeys are just making their pass through.
So just kind of food-centric run through, the yoga retreat.
Yep,
right.
Just to see if anybody's been sloppy.
All right.
That's awesome. I like the cadence, like, It's up, like they've got a route, you know. Like
Oh, they probably have
the
a
lap,
schedule.
and it's, you know, okay, every 3 days we're going to come back to this place. But
I'm sure the other 2 days they're visiting some of the other yoga retreats
That's exactly
in the
what
area.
I'm thinking. Yeah, there's just like a path they follow, and it's just a loop they keep going on.
So are we thinking this is like organized crime in the United States? So it's a monkey mafia of some
right.
type. All right.
Honestly, that's closer to the truth than you probably intended.
Wow. So where was the next stop after India?
So I think at this point I didn't really have a clear picture of what was next, but staying at this retreat in India and just making a few friends there, we decided that we would hire a driver to take us further up into the mountains. We were kind of in the foothills of the Himalayas at this point, and you know, we're here at this yoga retreat, and we're like, let's go see the Himalayas. Let's go up into the mountains. So we hired a driver, you know, half day of driving on essentially dirt roads, which was a highway. Like it was literally like an arterial highway, but it's just a dirt road with all kinds of construction and potholes, and took us way up into the mountains and finally saw those snow-capped peaks in the background. And I'm just an adventurous outdoorsy guy, and I just looked at those mountains and I was like, yep, I need to, the mountains are calling. So at that point, booked a trip, booked a flight to Nepal, and set up a plan to make a trek to Everest Base Camp.
Oh, cool.
That's awesome.
I'm an armchair mountaineer. I'm terrified of heights, but I've read every book on Everest and Denali and all the places in between. And big fan of John Krakauer, and who's documented a lot there. And I know, like this season, I just saw a site that I follow on RSS that said that based on what they think is happening with weather conditions and crowds, this might be the worst season on Denali in terms of deaths in a while. There's going to be a steady procession of people trying to summit. So
at this point, when you're in Nepal, like how long is this? Like how long has it been that you've been traveling now at this point?
Yeah, so I believe I got to Nepal in the beginning of December, and that would make it 8 months of traveling.
Okay. Wow.
and their winter is different than ours, right?
It is not.
It's
so
not?
Nepal is at a similar latitude as Florida.
Okay. Because they climb Everest in May. So you start in
you
April.
have 2 seasons that you actually climb Everest, and one of them is in May, and I think the other, you may have a narrow window in the fall as well, but
Yes,
May
it's
is the
very
most
narrow.
popular.
Yeah. The big one is in May.
Yeah. So Everest Base Camp is actually not any sort of settlement or anything. Like Everest Base Camp was literally the letters EBC, 5,300 and some meters spray painted on a giant rock. Because if there isn't an actual Everest expedition occurring at that time, Everest Base Camp is just literally just an imaginary spot on top of a glacier.
Right.
Yeah, it looks like just like a big rocky ledge that people camp on.
So it's really about going to Everest Base Camp is every bit about the journey as it is. It's everything is the journey. Nothing is really the destination itself other than to say you were there.
Sure.
Now, did you hire any Sherpas, or did you?
Did not. So if you were to try to do a trek like this during a high season, which would be maybe October and November, you would want to hire a guide. And the reason is not because the trail is hard to follow and you need somebody that knows the way. The reason would be because you would be in competition for places to sleep when you arrived in the villages.
Wow.
And having somebody that can arrange that would be crucial. But we went in December, which is after their peak season completely. And the winter is actually the dry season there. So it's not to say that you won't have precipitation, which honestly, I was grateful for the 6 inches of snow that we did have into the journey, and we honestly just took a couple days off. I was struggling with altitude-related illness at the time and just needed a couple days to acclimatize. And that also gave time for other people that actually knew the trail to stomp down some footprints for us to follow.
Sure.
In that 6 inches of snow. But that 6 inches of snow just made every bit of the landscape that much more beautiful. And I was thankful for that.
All right. Good deal. So what did you do after you left Nepal?
After Nepal, the next stop was Thailand. And not far from Nepal specifically, but Thailand, I think, marked the official halfway around the world point, at least as you would mark it by time zones. I didn't actually look at the points of longitude, but it was a nice break because in Thailand didn't really have a plan. After going on a 17-day trek to Everest Base Camp, that was the longest bit of hiking that I had ever done in my life, where it was really nice to get lost in that journey of it, where that's just what you do. Like, you hike, and then you arrive in the village that you're going to stay at, and then you eat and go to bed.
Right.
And in Thailand, it was like, okay, it's always 80 degrees and the water is warm and I can just go sit on the beach. Ended up learning to scuba dive on an island in Thailand, which was amazing. My reflection on Thailand is that I found so much of what would have been inspiration for the movie Avatar there. Just experiencing the underwater life, it was just alien and surreal. If you snorkeling is one thing, but to really scuba dive and get underwater to where everything else is just moving around you in 3 dimensions, it's really unique, and I think it's the closest thing that you'll feel on Earth to being in outer space.
It always seemed to me like, at least on the coast, that the beaches were beautiful and the marine life were amazing and things like that. What about further inland? I mean, did you get in there, and how were the communities and cities?
Didn't do a lot further inland. Bangkok feels quite modern. There's really nothing that pushed me out of my comfort zone in Bangkok as far as food or language barriers. I mean, you could certainly find some freaky street food if you went looking for it, but I tended to avoid that. Like, it's not worth the risk, to be perfectly honest.
Sure. No, I understand completely. Yeah.
This, for the record, coming from my good friend Mark, who had his first ever sushi experience just a couple days ago. So
Absolutely.
I got him to try some sushi. So we're branching
Wow.
out. Probably a good ways from freaky side street Bangkok food, but
Yeah, that's not going to happen
We're getting
anytime soon.
How
But
did that sushi? Did it stay down?
it did. It was
Okay.
good.
to the point where he ordered a second roll after the fact. So
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah. So I guess it pays to go to Jungle Gyms and drunk shop, and then
just 100% what we did. Yeah.
and then go do sushi.
Okay.
Yeah. I was
not quite traveling the world, but
Yeah.
within the microcosm of the greater Cincinnati metropolitan area, it's kind of the closest you can get to that, I guess.
Yeah, but in Key West they have a festival in October, and one of the events is street food in the Bahamian Village, and I walked through and asked questions. I don't know, 2 decades ago, and I decided I was never ordering street food. At a festival like that, and so I'm gonna stick with that, whether I'm in Thailand or in a U.S. state. So yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah,
When you're overseas, just make sure it's cooked well.
yeah. So what did you do after you left Thailand?
After Thailand, we went to the U.S. territory of Saipan, which is like an hour's flight from Guam, in the middle of this North Pacific Ocean, and spent a week there visiting my girlfriend's friend, and just kind of taking in their island lifestyle. They had it was a married couple, 2 kids, and they had, I believe, received some sort of stipend or incentive because she was a nurse, he was a teacher, to take residence on the island and fulfill those needed professions there. And it was just very interesting, so absolutely far from everything else, to just talk with somebody else about their perspective, having been so far from their family, especially starting a young family of their own, and just really hear about how they've reflected on that, and, whether they have regrets or, and there definitely is, there's, family is so far away, but the reflection that I really appreciated was that when they did go back to the United States to visit family, their visits were so much more meaningful. It wasn't just that we just sit around at grandma's house and watch TV together. It was, everybody was much more engaged in just really catching up and hearing about what's going on in each other's lives. That I really appreciated that, because it's something that we, there's something to say for that just sort of everyday camaraderie, companionship that we get from people that are just, geographically proximate to us. But
sure, I mean,
distance,
sometimes people say, "Yeah, we'll hook up and meet," and then they don't show, they cancel on your stuff. So
right,
yeah. So like,
know anybody like that?
If you came from an island, then people would certainly be, it would be more special and important.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think even just like, not necessarily even geographical proximity, but like the time zone difference even. Like, it's not
Sure.
like you can necessarily even just call somebody up because your day is the middle of their night, that sort of thing, that even kind of...
Yeah, communication is completely different.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. And to me, that's very brave and adventurous for a family with small kids to be that far away from a support system.
I was going to ask, like, is that stipend for, things like teachers and nurses, does that extend to like code monkeys who just sit in the basement all day? Because I might know somebody who's interested.
Do you? I'll reach out to my contacts.
Yeah, let me know. We'll,
I got to say, the
plan it
island
out.
lifestyle was pretty nice, but you do become aware that it's a little confining. If you've ever heard the phenomenon of island fever, people in Hawaii often speak of it, to where here we can just get in our car and drive for 5 hours and be somewhere completely different.
Right.
And you can drive in a radius, and you can be in hundreds of different places in, a few hours or more. When you're on an island, you can drive from the top of it to the bottom of it in 30 minutes. That can get kind of confining.
Yeah, I've even heard, especially I imagine, like, coming from a place like the United States that's so insanely big, because I know I've had friends from overseas who have come to the U.S. and they've been like, oh yeah, like, I'd like to, I'm in L.A. for a week and I want to go see Vegas, and like maybe if I have time I'll like go over to Florida, and it's like, no, you don't, and their thought is like, I'll rent a car and do this. And you're like, no, you're going to spend like the entire time driving. Like, you won't have time to do anything. Like, people don't understand the distance, and going from that, like, I can get in my car and I can literally drive for 4 days, and like I haven't hit the other side of the country yet, to I can drive for an hour and like I've lapped the island. Is a massive change to get used to.
Yeah, I living in a small town, it's not an island, but sometimes it feels like an island, and there's only so many days before I want to venture to the mainland, meaning a bigger city that has more than
Has a Chipotle and
yeah,
a Walmart.
has more than 3 stoplights. Yeah.
This is why it's not uncommon that Mark hits me up and says, "Hey, you want to like grab a beer up in your area? That's probably about like an hour away from where you live."
Yeah,
it's because of that phenomenon
It
factors.
is exactly that phenomenon. And when I first moved to the small town many years ago, there was one stoplight in the town. No fast food, no opportunities for much of anything except a mom and pop greasy spoon sort of place that was and still is a chain smoking. You go in and you get to have your breakfast beside a table of chain smoking Modiggies. And
is it that place off like the 127,
You-
like
you-
when you're
you
like right
drive
past
by
the
it.
pharmacy and it's on
Yeah.
the left there?
Yeah,
if I'm
you
heading
dri- you drive by when you come, yeah.
Yep.
yeah,
It's the kind of place where I've never been in this place before, but every time
Don't.
I've driven past it, I've looked at it, and it's in my imagination, it was exactly what you just described. Like it looks that way from the exterior. So
yeah, we supported them during COVID because COVID hit pretty hard, but at a certain point when things got better, we quit doing that because I was like, my food kind of smells like smoke.
Oh.
Yeah, I don't want that. So what's next? What was next from there?
Things got interesting at this point. I
like how
believe-
he says that, by the way, as if things haven't been interesting to this point. But
Oh no, because it is
perspective is all different.
It is January of 2020. It is the eve of the
yeah.
coronavirus pandemic.
which I think is important to keep in mind that for people like Mark and myself, like that was hitting in like March, but like on the other side of the world, that was not the same timetable. Things were
Because we denied it
accelerated
for
right,
so long.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
It was kind of it was an entity that was chasing me for a little while. So before going to Saipan, I believe that was when I had the layover in Hong Kong. So I spent a week in Hong Kong with that layover between Thailand and Saipan, and that was in January of 2020. This was like right when people were starting to get aware of coronavirus. A lot of people in Hong Kong were wearing masks, but there was still the virus is in mainland China, and Hong Kong is technically part of China, but it's sort of its own administrative
Right.
region.
Or
So
less so now than then, but
it was separate from the coronavirus was in mainland China, not in
Right.
Hong Kong. So being in Hong Kong was like okay. But needless to say, I was in Hong Kong, and that came back to find me later. After spending a week in Saipan, and then the next stop was the Philippines. Planned to just do some more island hopping and maybe some scuba diving in the Philippines on the way to New Zealand. So the stop was from Saipan was through Korea. Spent a couple days in Korea, in Seoul. Had a very good experience there. Went to one of the sort of traditional Korean spas, which was very interesting. You don't wear anything in the spas, and they have various like hot tubs with different minerals in them. You have like a salt bath thing where you can scrub down and then rinse it off. It was a very complete experience, even with several fellows that work there enthusiastically motioning you over for a massage that was part of your fee to get in. I declined. I was a little bit out of my comfort zone, and and that's saying something for me. Anyways, so
I feel like with enough soju, you could have overcome that. But
I probably would have. The enthusiasm was really what did it for me.
Yeah, a little over the top for you.
It was a little intense. So anyways, after 3 days in Korea, got on the plane, arrived in the Philippines, and this is like early mid-February of 2020 now. Coronavirus is heating up, and going through passport control, they're asking, where have you been in the last 2 weeks? And I'm thinking, should I include that I was in Hong Kong like 11 days ago? That's probably going to raise some eyebrows. So there was a part of me that was thinking, they're literally just asking you to handwrite a form and nobody's actually checking something. But
And in 2 weeks for you could be 10 days, not 11.
I came down, I was like, you know what, I'm going to be honest and put that I was in Hong Kong because the Philippines being led by a brutal dictator. And,
Right.
I just really, up to this point, had not ended up in any foreign jails and just kind of wanted to keep that streak alive. So
That's a good thing, right?
they looked at the form and they almost let us in. And then she was like, oh, wait, you were in Hong Kong. So we get pulled aside before we enter the country. We're in the airport, but they ask some questions like, yes, we were in Hong Kong. We were there for touring. We were there for 7 days. And, well, we can't let you enter since it's been less than 2 weeks. So we kind of negotiate to say, well, can we just remain here in quarantine for the 3 days so that we can enter the country after, we've proven not to have coronavirus. So we spent 3 days in a quarantine room, which was essentially an airport terminal that they had turned into a quarantine with, felt very much like a pop-up hospital with cots, and you'd have to pay somebody to go get food for you, and then they would buy food for themselves with your credit card. But
At that point, were there, in this hospital-type environment, were there very many people that were sick that you could tell?
no, most of them were returning residents of the Philippines.
Okay.
So they'd show up, and then I think at one point they catered like chicken wings or something from one of the local restaurants, and everybody ate, and then they came in and they just said, all right, well, the rest of you can go home. But no, after 3 days, we've achieved our 14 days total since we had been in Hong Kong, and thinking they're going to let us in now, right? So then, they come up to us like they've got an announcement to make, and they've arranged for us to be returned to Korea, where we came from, because they can't let us enter.
Oh, no
Well, and
shit.
at that point, things were starting to heat up everywhere but the old U.S. of A.
Yep.
Countries were taking responsible actions.
So mid-February, I'm returned to Korea and wondering, like, what the hell do I do now? Because I don't really know what is happening with coronavirus. Like, it's obvious that it's accelerating, it's spreading, and I don't want to get trapped somewhere. Like, this is kind of scary. Should I go home? Should I try to continue my trip? So made the decision in mid-February, to go to New Zealand, which was the logical next stop after the Philippines. And they didn't have any border restrictions at the time, so booked a plane ticket and went to New Zealand.
And that's where we first talked. You were looked like an apartment type place in New Zealand?
Arrived in New Zealand mid-February and rented a car and just began touring New Zealand in the way that I had originally intended to, which was driving around, staying in a few hostels, but a lot of camping in a tent. And after 3 weeks, I was staying in a hostel, and this is early March now, and New Zealand announced that you have 48 hours before you must shelter in place for a level 4 lockdown. So it went from no restrictions to like the highest possible restrictions.
That's what I was thinking when you said about booking your ticket from Korea, because they had no border restrictions, and then I knew they'd taken some of the most drastic. But I feel like that also had paid off, because to a degree, because I know when you and I talked, and like Mark had said, it was, the first time I had a conversation with you, you were at like a house you had been staying at with several other travelers, and, it was 5 p.m. my time and like 9 a.m. your time or something like that. But that life there was like quote unquote normal, right? Like you could go out to bars or restaurants or whatnot, and things weren't really impacted. Whereas here it was, Mark and I are, going into breweries and buying pallets of beer or whatever with, our masks on, like almost wearing hazmat suits, and sanitizer it up like in the car afterward,
and recording podcast in public parks.
Yes,
in a Delta airline stream. So the planes would fly over top as we were sitting there. We were drinking actually mostly Braxton beer at the time and recording podcasts.
I think we had some of their smoothies that we were drinking, and we would pause periodically as the planes flew through. But it was a very different experience.
Should they be sponsoring us? Should I be expecting somebody to bring me a complimentary beverage?
We have we're 2.5 years into this podcast sort of thing, and so far nobody has sponsored us or given us a free beer because of the podcast. And we've gotten free beer, but not because of the podcast.
Yet. Anyway, not steer your thunder, but just kind of highlighting the difference of experience between the two places.
Absolutely,
how they handled it with that lockdown.
So you were in a walled area. So did you all rent a? When I interviewed for you for a job, where were you?
So, at the point where I was informed that there will be 48 hours before you must fully shelter in place, which meant you need to be in a place of permanent residence. You can only leave your house or your property for food, medicine, and you are allowed to exercise in your neighborhood. There was no, driving across town to check on your grandmother. There were police checkpoints like on the highways out of the city to confirm that nobody was actually trying to do things like that. It was a very mandatory and forceful shelter in place. But it was...
And New Zealand, for a long time, was one of the best places to be in terms of COVID infection rates.
Absolutely. As soon as they had determined that there were local transmissions of coronavirus, which means that they determined that the person in New Zealand that acquired it had got it from somebody else in New Zealand and not as a result of being overseas, they just made the decision to put in that full lockdown. And there was definitely, you could feel the grumbling throughout the society, but people generally just complied. And the leader...
Because it was the right thing to do?
The leader at the time of the country, Jacinda Ardern, very passionate lady, and what struck me the most was that we didn't care. The decisions that were being made weren't really even considering the economy or those aspects of it. It was really all about protecting human life. And I know there's various opinions about how severe the coronavirus is, but at the time we didn't know. And I really applauded...
There was no data.
I really applauded that the decision was made just wholeheartedly about protecting human life. Whether that's the right decision for every country, that's probably a different podcast episode, but I appreciated it, and I got an entirely different perspective on the kind of response that would have made sense, because New Zealand was the one place that actually stopped COVID in its tracks. Like after 6 weeks of lockdown, they released it. So after like 3 weeks, there were no more locally transmitted cases. Everybody that had acquired it was in quarantine. And then after 6 weeks, I think after like 4 or 5 weeks, it was like downgraded from level 4 to level 3, which meant that we could prepare to resume economic activities. And then after that, it went down to a level 1. Like, it's not here. The borders are closed. Anybody that was a citizen with the right to live in New Zealand could return and go through a mandatory 2-week, government-run quarantine. But other than that, after that 1 week of level 1 lockdown, which basically meant like if I went to a gift shop, I had to do contact tracing. So either using an app or just signing in on a sign-in sheet. Couple weeks of that, and it was just level 0. Life is normal.
So in other words,
that was May of 2020.
Just
at the point
caring
where
about
things,
human life.
Things resumed normal.
Yeah, doing the
May
right
of
thing.
2020 in New Zealand.
May of 2020. Let's repeat that. May of 2020, New Zealand returned to normal because people didn't create conspiracy theories, question authority, and were good human beings because the measures in place were designed to protect people.
And it was 13 months after that we here felt comfortable doing a trip down to the Keys as like our...
And really every other first world nation kind of fumbled this one too. I don't know if it's just the size of those nations. Like everybody would like to say it was easier for New Zealand because they're an island, but that's bullshit. Like every country has border controls that are enforced to either land or air, and anybody that wanted to shut down their borders could have. Like, yeah, I get it. You can say this or that about people, crossing the river in Mexico, but for the most part, like borders are borders and they are controlled.
Yeah, for sure. And I get what you're saying, but there were other places besides New Zealand that are first world countries that had similar positive results because they did the right thing swiftly and early, and everybody didn't bellyache about, oh, my fucking rights, and people didn't bellyache about wearing a mask, and just common sense approach to things. We had the data on the numbers. We didn't have the data on the virus itself, and cancer has gone on for decades and decades, diabetes and all the different diseases we have, heart disease, and none of those have been fixed. I don't understand how some portions of our society thought, oh, well, we should just fix this immediately, snap our fingers, COVID will go away, and we don't have to do all this stuff, and you don't have to infringe on my constitutional rights. And yet, places like New Zealand and a handful of other places did the right thing early on, and they didn't suffer. And then when they had reinfection later, they responded appropriately and quashed stuff pretty quickly. Because New Zealand did have they probably had a bigger COVID issue later on versus earlier on because the way they handled things.
They had they didn't open their borders to international citizens until there was an adequate amount of time for anybody that wanted to get vaccinated to do so. So then, of course, you open those borders, and even with requiring proof of negative tests, you're going to get cases that come across the border.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
Vaccinated people still got COVID, but not as bad, and things like that.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I was vaccinated and I got COVID.
Yeah, I had it here in the States, and it was very mild. I'm vaccinated. I've had the booster, and it was much milder than any flu I've ever had for me. So,
yeah, mine was less than a big flu, but I think my co-host here, he got a double whammy. But we'll talk about that in another podcast because it directly relates to Braxton.
It does, in fact. Yeah.
So what did you
back it?
Yeah. So what did you do after you left New Zealand?
Well, I think I should brag about my lockdown experience. So upon receiving notice that I need to shelter in place and I need to be doing so within the next 48 hours, that was kind of an oh shit moment, because at this point I have a rental car, I'm driving around, sleeping in my tent, and then occasionally having like a hostel stay if it's really raining and I don't want to deal with that. So do I just stay in a hostel for however long this lockdown might last? I think they said we're going to do it for 2 weeks and then we'll revisit it. So nobody knew that it was going to be 6 weeks. It could have been, 4 months, or it could have just been that 2 weeks. Found people on Facebook that were trying to fill a vacation home that whoever was going to vacation there had obviously canceled due to this lockdown. And New Zealand has I'll say a large community of van dwellers. And what this community is you can get a visa to tour and work in New Zealand for 12 months. Allows you the right to work, and then you have to be between the age of 25 and 35 or something of that nature. I was just outside of that, but so there are a lot of people that work seasonally on farms and whatnot, and then spend the remainder of their time touring New Zealand, and they don't have permanent, habitation. They live out of a camper van. So a lot of these people were facing, the same conundrum that I was. What do we do during this lockdown? And it ended up that there were 2 couples and 1 single guy, and we all ended up sharing a house right next to the beach in a city in New Zealand.
Sounds like a tough life.
I think I had the best possible lockdown experience. Like, I even thought about this, because what about the people that got trapped on, like, an island paradise? Like, I even think I had it better than them. Like, yeah. I could go walking on the beach, but I had other things to do. Like, there was, I could walk to, like, a modern grocery store. And, we had like a house that had heat and air conditioning, and it had an oven. So like all of us that had been driving around camping, like an oven was something that was just a complete luxury. So the other people that we're sharing this house with, we're all taking turns baking and like having goods and playing cards together. And because you can exercise locally as part of the lockdown, I got into running. I was running on the beach like 3 or 4 times a week. I was in the best shape of my life. I felt great. And, I was blessed.
It sounds like
the rest of y'all were just tripping over your feet and just living in misery, losing your jobs and going insane in your homes.
I don't know that was really my experience or John's. My experience, and I believe John's, was that we regularly ordered from breweries, and one of us picked it up, and we beer muled beer everywhere, and we stayed drunk during the pandemic.
I would say it was probably the most impressive, like, transportation of alcohol since like Prohibition, probably. I mean, we there were literally people who would be like, getting stuff from like south of Lexington and bringing up to Cincinnati and vice versa. We'd be like orchestrating beer swaps at like, we'll both pull over at like this gas station off the interstate, trade stuff or whatnot. But it is an interesting experience, if nothing else, to go into a brewery and like, there's literally like a pallet of beer that they're trying to help you load into your car because it's for like 8 people who have ordered stuff.
Yeah, and John would be like, he would go in and he would be like, "No, are you getting marks too?"
Yeah. They like to the point where they knew the other people that I would buy beer for. And to Braxton's credit, like when things started to loosen up a little bit and you could like go back into the tap room, they mailed me like $10-15 gift cards because I just
because John was really the local mule.
I was, yeah. I mean, every single week after their Thursday special beer release, I would show up and pick up anywhere from $30 to $150 worth of beer, depending on who had done the orders.
We should talk about that in more detail on the next podcast.
Probably should, yeah.
Because
we're tangenting.
But there were a lot of cool things related to
there
that.
were, yeah, there really were.
Pandemic moonshiners.
Yeah,
basically, yeah.
So
overalls.
So let's come home. So you left New Zealand and you came home?
Oh, the best part of the whole trip was New Zealand, though. So after being freed of the lockdown in May, I then had I rented a camper van and had 3 months of just driving around in this camper van and seeing some of the most incredible places, frankly, in the world. Like New Zealand has some of the most spectacular landscapes, really, of anywhere that I visited. It's maybe doesn't have the most gigantic mountains as Nepal, or doesn't have like the massive deserts of Africa, but New Zealand hits everything pretty damn good in as small of a package as it is. Sure. To where you can be skiing on, the mountains, and then 2 hours later you can be surfing on the beach in a wetsuit. But
sure. I know I was super jealous before you and I had ever even spoken. I think I got looped in on like an email thread with a few people at work, and you had shared photos that were just like your day to day. Like, oh yeah, no, in the morning I like grab some toast and a cup of tea, and like I come out here and sit on this beach and have my breakfast, and I'm like, man, holy shit! Like I'm out here, like the most exciting thing I do is I go have a cup of coffee on my deck, outside of my apartment, which I bought furniture for under the pretense of I got to do this quick before we like have to go back to the office. Like I want to be able to have breakfast and work out on the deck for a little bit. So I was very envious of just your like day to day while you were there with the photos that you had shared. It was incredible.
It was interesting at this point, I've been overseas for a year, give or take.
Right.
And I'm fully living a different lifestyle than everybody else that I know, where they're working that 9 to 5. They have that job, that structure, that permanent place of living. So I've kind of gotten detached from that, and I did find an interesting reflection that I had was that after, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 months of traveling, I started to find an urge to occupy some of my time with work-like habits. And I think everybody has their own nature. Some of us are workaholics and have a really hard time separating from that. I don't, but I still found that I had the desire to engage in activities that were work-like, or were things that provided for my existence in society. And that was interesting. Like, you always tend to think that as a working stiff, like, if I won the lottery, I would never work again. But there was at least a certain desire in me to be doing things that were constructive to my own existence, that I found creeping back in. So some of my time in New Zealand I spent studying and practicing computer programming.
I felt like when we talked, when you were in New Zealand and we were interviewing you for a position, I felt like it felt to me like it was time for you to get back to doing something productive. Not that you were out of money, not that you were tired of traveling the world, but it felt like you had a need to do something that scratched a particular itch professionally.
A need is a strong word, but
maybe an inclination be a safer description of it.
There was a reality that I can't not have a job for the rest of my life, that I had to acknowledge.
Okay.
Yeah. There would have been some sacrifices.
I get that. Yeah. Being semi-retired, I use the word semi in case I actually want to come back to work. But I get that. I get that for sure. So did you come straight home from New Zealand? Did you go someplace else?
Nope, straight home from New Zealand.
To Columbus?
The original plan was to spend 6 weeks in New Zealand and then go to Australia, and then had kind of added on spending 6 to 8 weeks in South America before COVID kind of imposed its will on my itinerary. So after really touring New Zealand for 3 months and just seeing everything, almost everything that I could have wanted to see in New Zealand at a relaxed pace, which was just absolutely incredible. I mean, I went on some of the world's most incredible hikes, and I was the only one on that trail. And the borders are closed. There's no other tourists. Like normally some of these places would just be, tour buses upon tour buses of people. And I just pulled up to an empty parking lot, and I had it all to myself. Some of the most incredible hikes in the world. After 3 months of that, coronavirus is obviously, we're talking about, I don't know, it's getting to fall here in the northern hemisphere. And coronavirus is still very much an issue. Like, it's not been a part of my life for a while. I haven't even thought about it. Like, I just go out, I want to go to a restaurant, I just go sit down in a restaurant, like, with other people. Nobody's wearing masks. I went to some concerts.
Right, and it was every day for us for way longer than New Zealand, for sure.
Yeah. So at that point, I was starting to think that maybe I could live in New Zealand. I loved it. I liked the landscape. It's just an incredibly scenic country. And the path to getting the right to work was a little difficult for me, just being somewhat older, like 36. I was above the threshold to get a visa that probably would have been easily available to me. And I also don't have a 4-year degree. I have certifications in networking that have been my gateway to my career in the United States, but they're essentially meaningless because they're issued by a private institution, not an actual educational institution. It's
right.
The company that makes the products for which I'm specialized in.
It's not accredited.
It's not accredited. So I really had no realistic path to getting a right to work that was going to work out too well for me unless somebody sponsored me, which nobody really wanted to do that. So kind of stayed put for a couple months in a little, not an apartment, but a mother-in-law suite that somebody was renting out. And before finally deciding that I'd just reach out to some contacts I have in the USA and see if anybody wants to hire me. And then I came home.
Good deal.
October of 2020.
So as we're closing out this episode, which might end up being 2 episodes,
whoops.
You don't want another 2-hour episode like the last one turned into.
We might. The last one was 2 hours, and this segment is already at 51 minutes. So we'll see. But do you find yourself wanting to do the same thing again now, or in a couple of years, or in 5 years, or did that handle your wanderlust and you have a different wanderlust?
Absolutely want to do it again. And I think everybody should consider doing this at some point in their life. I do have the reflection that maybe 18 months was too long. I did have some challenges acclimating back to professional and normal life. I think 6 to 9 months is probably more in the range of a future sabbatical for me. But just disconnecting from the speed of your lifestyle, that just 40 hours a week paying rent and doing all of your first world adulting. It was just so nice to just do something different, and it just gives you so much more room to really reflect on what's important and frankly grow as a person. I'll definitely do it again.
So when you do it again, will you head south to South America, or will you revisit someplace you've been, or will you go someplace in Europe or Africa or someplace that you didn't get to that you wanted to get to?
Yeah, so I think I would do Australia and then maybe include some time in Indonesia. But I'm glad I didn't make it to Australia because I was only going to spend 3 weeks there. And after spending 8 months in New Zealand, I experienced it in a whole different way versus a packed tourist itinerary to where you can like explore and just integrate yourself into the way of life in this other country. That in itself was a valuable experience, and I'd like to do the same in Australia, to just have an extended period of time to maybe just get some kind of vehicle. Maybe it's a camper van and tour around Australia. I'd like to do South America as well. It would definitely be its own trip, just to immerse in a continent that speaks a different language. I think that would be an awesome experience. And then something for North America. I think there's so much to see in America that would really make that a worthwhile expenditure of a long-term sabbatical.
I know you and I have talked about some road trips here, so maybe we can knock those out in the coming years and do that. So, anything else, John?
The only question, because I have to ask the heavy hitting questions. Like I probably should have been the one to do a recent CNN town hall, because I'll take people to task. Out of all the places that you were at, where was the best food in your opinion?
Oh.
If you had to narrow it down to one, I'm gonna put you on the spot.
India.
That's not surprising.
I love Indian food. I always have. Staying at the yoga retreat, I was fed all you can eat 3 times a day. It wasn't like the restaurant Indian food, which, say, not that we're getting it that wrong in America,
sure,
but it was like made fresh. Like the yogurt was actually like from the cow that they had on the grounds. I had not been happier with what I was putting in my stomach than India.
That's
Good
awesome.
deal. That's interesting, but really not surprising. I know a lot of people just rave about Indian food.
Loved it. Surprised nobody asked if I got into any trouble or anything like that.
So
we want to put you on blast on like a recording like that. You know, we have limits here.
But I do actually end most podcasts with what question should I've asked that I didn't ask. So did you get in any trouble?
Not really. I think the worst thing that happened, had to bait you into it. The worst thing that happened was getting turned around at the Philippines. Maybe having to bribe a few cops in Africa out of speeding tickets. But no, I didn't.
Which seems to be part of their culture that you're supposed to do
it
that.
is. It is. I didn't wake up in any jail cells. I didn't get seduced by ladyboys in Thailand. Like, I'm in my mid-30s. Like, stories of a younger generation, I suppose.
All right, good deal. Well, we appreciate you joining us this afternoon for the Same Shade of Difference or McC Wonders, whichever it ends up being, podcast. I know you don't do social media, but is there any place anybody can follow you anywhere?
Or if not you, is there any place like websites for any causes, charities, anything you want to have people go look at? And if the answer is no, that's fine too.
My name's Alex. If you see me at a bar, love to chat. Can't really connect any other way, I'm afraid.
And before I get to...
I'm envious of that.
Yeah.
To a degree.
Before I get to John, so one of the things I meant to ask and didn't was, I know you took pictures. So what did you do from a picture-taking standpoint? Did you use your phone? Did you use a camera? And have you done anything with those pictures other than they're just for your self-reflection?
Yeah, I thought about it. I've got a Facebook account that I like put an album up on every month or so that I currently really don't use for anything. But other than that, I traveled with a digital SLR, a Nikon crop sensor camera. So it was about with the lens and the batteries and everything, it was maybe 4 or 5 pounds of camera equipment. I had a GoPro that I was also using, but it fell off of a kayak into a lake, a glacial lake in Norway, so it's gone. And then obviously using a phone. I had a Samsung Galaxy S8 that took pretty good pictures. So I've got albums that I've kept for myself. I've got a few things that I've put up on my wall at home, and really just kind of for me. Maybe some point I'd share it if I found an appropriate venue, but I guess the only thing that motivates me to really share it is to try to inspire other people to appreciate the beauty of the world, and also to just live, like to get out of that rat race and live like I did.
And you've certainly inspired me in terms of things I should do that I'm not doing. I know that being an armchair mountaineer, I've sat through a number of those picture presentations at bookstores and REI stores and stuff like that, and I've always found them fascinating. So I guess I would just say, if there's ever an opportunity for you to share your pictures someplace with a small group of people, I've always found that compelling. It's always been small groups of people, and I've never seen anybody that didn't walk away with the wows. So, John, where can people find you?
So if you want to find me on the interwebs, you can go to my website, looped.network. That has... It changes day by day. I actually redid the whole website this morning, so it's different than what it was yesterday. But at the very least, it'll always have links to all my other junk online. So looped.network is
John mostly redoes it, does his website so that he can throw shade at myself and another one of our friends on a regular basis via text message.
It's really not that hard to put a website on the internet. I'm just saying. But not that this is a segue or anything. But Mark, where can people find you on the internet?
Well, people can find me at Craft Brew Geek on all the socials, or craftbrewgeek.com,
which is not a website. It's a C name to your Instagram account. I think
it is a C name to my Instagram account. But if you type it in, it'll take you someplace.
It'll get you where you need to go.
And then the Same Shade of Difference, which is the current name for this podcast, and it actually has its own website, only because the podcast registrar gives us a website.
And a pretty good one, I would say. As far as the options within your podcast hosting goes, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's a pretty good website. So, Alex, once again, thanks. This was super cool. And maybe we could talk about when you have some planning done for your next one. Get back together and say, hey, Alex is going to take a sabbatical and head this place or that place. We'd love to hear what you're thinking.
Yeah, I'd love to have you join me wherever I go.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, man.
Thank you.